We'll be starting in just a moment, and feel free to put your questions right into the chat for our mods to come and screen, and please try to keep them clear, legible, and understandable. As always, we welcome super chats to help support the show, and you can also find links to our website and other options in the episode description. With all that said, welcome, and let's get started. Or some kind of technical way to start things off. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Science and Futurism's monthly livestream Q&A on October the 29th. We're going in just one moment, though we keep having some minor technical issues, so it might be a little bit glitchy as we get used to it, which, to be fair, happens a lot of the time. So, as usual, we are joined by my lovely wife and co-host, Sarah Fowler-Arthur, who will be reading off your questions from the audience, and we will go ahead and get started with those whenever you guys are ready.
You mean whenever the phone actually works to pull them up?
Let me see if I can bring them up to actually ask questions off of instead while I move that around.
I got a new phone. And it won't let me log into anything.
So, Imagination Ship asks, which do you think is more plausible to come to fruition, FTL or multiverse travel? And I would say that I'd be a little bit more believable about multiverse travel just because, generally speaking, FTL requires us to violate known rules, whereas we don't know how to actually get into touch with any kind of multiverse or detect any multiverse, so we don't know if there's going to be any way to get between them. If they exist, and in any meaningful sense, you should be able to travel to them. So either they don't exist, and you can't travel to them, or they do exist, and you probably can. You could make the philosophical argument that if you cannot contact them, detect them, or anything in any fashion, then they may as well not exist. And that's maybe semantic, but in that regard, there's nothing that says it's impossible if they exist. And if we can detect them, we can probably travel to them or interact with them.
All right, the next question. Thank you, Maya Skill, for dropping it in so it would actually ping me, and is from Raven. Hi, Isaac. What practical uses might suborbital spaceflight have?
Suborbital is actually one of those examples to explain that to people is when you orbit a planet, you go around it in a circle or ellipse. When you're going suborbital, you're on an elliptical pathway that would actually intersect with the planet. But you can go up high in the air and fall right back down again. That would be an example of suborbital flight that would actually take you higher up than the normal distance you are to space. So one example of a suborbital flight we might use regularly would be active support inside like a space tower. That is pretty much always by definition going to be suborbital, just because you're trying to push things up. It's also used for ICBMs a lot too. You have those deflected path trajectories because it's you don't actually want them to have a chance to shoot your orbiting objects, so you use a suppressed trajectory instead to land on faster. So those would be examples of how suborbital flight might be useful. Delivering weapons, I think we talked about this in the search and rescue episode. You might actually drop not just weapons or troops down, but search and rescue personnel at very, very high velocities, and that would be an example where those kind of depressed trajectories or suborbital flights could be useful. That would be the major ones that I can think of off the top of my head.
All right. We have a question that was actually posted on Reddit, and it's from Miami's Last Capitalist. Thank you for your super chat. Are there any possible plans to save the ISS from destruction burning in atmosphere?
I guess that would be a question of, do we have a way of saving it if it suddenly goes down into the atmosphere more than it should? And that would be all about timing if there was a launch window to get back momentum. If you mean in the sense of when we retire it, are we just going to let it fall into the atmosphere? I would hope not, but at the same time, when we retire it, because it wouldn't be safely useful anymore, and that would be an example of where do you want to pay a lot of money to keep it up there, or can you find a new purpose? And of course, you don't retire if you can find a new purpose, but it would be sad to let that one fall down. I'd rather we spent some extra energy, and it might be quite a lot of extra energy, to push into a higher orbit so it could just orbit for a long time, and then we're more prosperous in spacefaring culture or rescue our relics, as opposed to just getting them stepped on or destroyed in the atmosphere, as happened to all the other previous space stations. Those are gone forever. You're not going to get those back. And I'd hate to see the ISS join them, but at the same time, rescuing it might be very expensive.
So maybe you can settle this debate. If the enemy has fired missiles at your spaceship, which is a better point for defense, laser or kinetic? And if mixed, how so?
By the way, apologies everyone if you see a little flickering across the scene. I'm getting those too. I think it's because we got the new studio set up. I don't know if you noticed, it's a little bit different than normal. We've been rearranging the whole week. So, what would you use? The problem with using something like a laser is that it once you let it go, it's gone, right? Same as a normal bullet. But the thing is, a normal kinetic mass bullet could have a little rocket engine and a piece of guidance that lets it move. And so in that regard, the laser is your best for really close, really rapid response stuff because you can pump that through there at the speed of light. For things that are further away, where the object might have enough delta V to be able to jink around, then it becomes a bit of a different issue. You might want something that actually has homing capacity and ability to change its trajectory. I'll give you an example. We talked about this more in space warfare. If you're not catching little bits, go to that video. But when you are coming towards something and at space level distances where the speed of light is actually going to take a second or at least a few milliseconds to reach you, your speech, you cannot react to that. You can't see if someone's pointing a laser at you and dodge, but you can preemptively react to it by jinking a little bit to the side, left or right. And when you're in space, a little bit of delta V, if you suddenly move 1 meter to the second to the right, a second later you are a meter to the right. When you have those unpredictable velocities, they're going to get missed a lot more. And those only exaggerate at greater distances, which is why things like lasers you can keep on target are no good beyond a certain range. That's probably anything bigger than cislunar space would not be good for anything intelligent. You might still use it for taking out asteroid clumps, but not a spaceship. But that was a warship, and they could have moved to the side in advance. And so when your object gets there, it can react and move too, or do it as of the way while the laser beam is just going to miss. So it would depend on the range of the ships and the amount of thrust they had to move around, but it's not necessarily a thrust issue because let's say I have 2 pods that are connected by a tether or a beam. They don't have to expend any rocket fuel on their way to me, these 2 payload missiles, to go like this, back and forth, up and down, spin around. They can do that basically fuel-free. And so that's one of those ways you can kind of cheat around that and avoid getting hit by lasers, but not if you're too close. So lasers for close in, further away, missiles or other guided systems, where that breaking point is going to be hard to say.
So we have a question here from Christian Corello, and thank you for your super chat. If you can combine 2 or more drives for a spaceship, which would you pick and how would you arrange them? I considered combining solar sails with Orion drives, but learned from Quora that wouldn't work.
I don't know why that wouldn't work. So what you would normally do with something like an Orion drive is use it to slow down. Because if you do not have a way to slow down your destination, you're going to be in trouble. You can also magnetically slow down too, but the combination that would probably work best that's just known technology would be a mixture of laser sail, which might be microwaves as opposed to lasers, but same difference. Laser sail and maybe a mag sail to slow down with, and an Orion drive to provide some of your additional oomph. My optimal way for doing that for combining 2 drives would probably be the laser sail to get you going, then a nuclear reactor to keep you alive while you're going. Obviously, fusion would be nicer than fission if you've got it. And then I would have a big pod on the front of the ship that has nothing but a compacted sail in it, basically my own shielding for while I was going through interstellar space. And it has all of my extra nukes and all of my extra sail. And when we're approaching the next star that we're going to get to, it pops free, pushes us back a little and itself forward a little bit, and accelerates in towards that star a little bit, and then spreads its sail, slows down, and starts that daisy chain laser sail thing we've talked about before, where whichever sail reaches the sun first being slowed down as a solar sail, uses all that energy it's collecting to hit the one behind it to slow it down, which does it in turn to something that's a fixed beaming station at that location. That would be hard to coordinate, but it should be something that would theoretically be doable. So, as with a lot of things, it depends on what the engineering is going to let you do, and that's a hard one to test, but you could do that by, say, launching them in from Pluto or something like that at our own sun, as opposed to having to wait till you get Alpha Centauri to see if it works. And that would be the best one, unless you got a really good Buford ramjet setup that actually lets you slow down at least that way, which might be better.
The next question is from Samuel Tweedle. Thoughts on cold welding, also known as vacuum welding?
Not too many. I'm like the only guy in my family who doesn't know how to weld, and all my uncles and cousins weld regularly. So I'm actually not that big of not that knowledgeable how they do welding in space. I would say in a lot of these cases, you might actually see a lot of welding going on while it's actually pressurized. You might see in a lot of cases where what they do is put some kind of seal over top of it as they're working, maybe even just a suction cup over the spot being welded, just so that there's a little bit more normality going in, and that might give you additional options how to weld. Most of the time you're going to be welding in space on space habitat, you're doing a pressurized setup, so I don't know that you would always necessarily be wanting to do vacuum welding that way, but beyond that, I'm afraid I can't tell you too much.
Our channel regular Albert Jackinson, welcome back. Thank you for being with us. Hi, Isaac and Sarah. It's good to be back.
Good to see you too.
Hope you enjoyed your trip. With a total solar eclipse coming up, what astronomical phenomena might people be able to view once we expand outwards into the solar system?
Let me think. Probably one of the neatest things to do is going to be any time you could actually see an eclipse on the sun from another planet, and you can do that at like the L2 point for any planet. You should be able to get your eclipses there. But a lot of them do have fairly distant ranges, so they might not fully eclipse it. But you should be able to, especially with the spaceship, spend protracted periods of times in a planet's total shadow. The problem is that things like Mercury and Venus are smaller than Earth and a lot closer to the sun, whereas the L2 point really is not. So I don't know if they'd really be completely in shadow the way the James Webb Telescope, for instance, is. You could do that with Saturn or Venus for sure. I think that you'd have a lot of really interesting conjunctions on the planets the moons out around the bigger planets too. But in terms of really neat astronomical phenomena, the biggest one, and it's one that Arthur C. Clarke talked about before we even got up into space, is that you see way more stars. You know, it's kind of a mistake to think about it is stars don't twinkle in space because they're very vivid and they're very single dots of light. There's no atmosphere getting in the way. They won't twinkle, but there'll be thousands and thousands more of them. And they'll be always there, whereas the sun is always in the other direction shining. There is no nighttime in space unless you're behind a planet. The sun is always at full noon glare. So there'll be a very different way of looking at the world, and one of those things to look for when we do get the solar eclipse, which will be passing over this house in April, is that
we'll be in the total dark zone.
Total zone for that. It's perfect, and I'm probably going to throw a party that day. Is the way watch the way that the light goes down, because you're used to twilight levels of light, and you'll get those, but they won't be the normal twilight colors. It'll be the same vivid daytime noon colors, but toned down, whereas you kind of get used to always seeing everything in glare. So it is a very different experience that everything just feels a little bit strange enough during a solar eclipse. I think that would be the way it is on a lot of different planets too, because it will be normal in some ways, but all the more strange because of how it's different.
All right, so Scooter GSP says, you frequently mention hydroponics playing a large role in the future, but multiple sources have said that hydroponically grown vegetables taste terrible. How can this issue be resolved?
I mean, that's a tricky one. It makes me think of artificial meat. When they first growing artificial meat, the biggest problem they found was that people didn't like it. Then they put blood on it, and then it's like, oh, it tastes great now. It's I love this stuff. That was what was missing, was blood. So, but for hydroponics, I grew up on hothouse tomatoes as a pretty common thing. My grandfather's house had a greenhouse attached to our house. Your grandfather did too, didn't he? It's a really big one. Yeah. So I kind of got used to those weren't hydroponic ones in those cases though. I don't know what would be missing from them particularly. I would think that might be something like lettuce.
Bricks.
Or
the sugar bricks. So your sunlight is what creates the sweetness flavor, and certain micronutrients are what causes them to be tasty or not tasty. So it probably depends on what your mix in the water is and whether or not you have a good light combination to actually get some sweetness into the vegetable.
That's probably very true. For anyone who didn't know, my wife is a farmer by trade, and both father and grandfather were an agricultural scientist and a horticultural scientist, so it's kind of one of those areas she knows way more about than I do.
Sorry, jumping in. All right. Do you have anything else to add on that?
Nope.
Not provided. Thank you for your super chat. I don't mean to bother you too much, but I wanted to follow up on if you can do an episode on the Pans-Cosmorial hypothesis.
Yes.
Or at least a very short explanation on this stream and ask the audience for feedback.
It's funny you should ask that. Wait till the intermission, but then after the intermission, wait until early January. It should be actually up there on one of the slides that would run up there, because I decided after doing I think it's the intermission for this month, that I needed to discuss it even more. So it has an episode in January.
Okay, wonderful. So
next
coming
question.
right up.
Yeah.
Milano, if you did a video on life in 2323 AD, how would that differ from life in 2323?
Well, in 23 AD would be the year 2,233,000. Wait, has I got that right? No, 200,320. Yeah, okay. So in the year 200,000, we did one. That's when the episode Intergalactic Colonization. It's the last one for the Unity for that series, and as Life in a Space Colonist. They're out the system we call the Terminus system around some brown dwarf or very large Jovian, and they're rebuilding a fleet to go to Andromeda. That was the life in 23 AD. Albeit we mostly discussed how they're planning to colonize outward if they stopped like 30,000 times or some insane number, 30,000 light years out, and they've stopped at and founded thousands of colonies along the way. So that is the 23 AD one. And I'd say if you want the 6 million year one, that go read House of Suns by Alastair Reynolds. It's kind of unintentional. I sometimes think of that series as being the fan canon lead up to that story series. So because it's one of my favorite sci-fi novels. But that would be life in 23 AD, intergalactic colonization.
Adam Rat says, what sci-fi trope do you feel is underrepresented?
Underrepresented. I can tell you some ones that are overrepresented. The one Planet of the Hats type thing, where you go to some planet or some species of alien, and they're all very much the same. Like they're all Klingon warriors, or they're all very logical scientisty Vulcans, and you wonder who actually mops the floors, or who actually does. Like I think one episode of DS9, they had a Klingon lawyer.
So you're saying the underrepresented populations are those who actually do normal work?
Yeah, in those cases anyway, yes. And so that's the Planet that has the same one for the case we have one city on an entire planet, and it's all the same terrain. So you go visit some planet, and as far as you might be concerned, it's just that one little town or settlement, and everything else is empty. In terms of ones I'd love to see more of, that I think it never really gets old, is any real discussion of the actual civilization's day-to-day operations, which unfortunately a lot of times are an author track for what particular ideology they happen to love or hate that they put in there. But those explorations tend to be a lot more fun for me. So exploring the actual culture of that civilization and its history, building up that world-building setting, that's the thing I tend to feel really gets missed there. I don't know what trope that would fall under, though, because the problem is I don't know if there is an underrepresented trope by definition, since they're always the cliche things people use a lot. And sci-fi's got pretty much all of them except for the ones that are cliches in another genre, like even was it the farm boy with a sword that's very popular, and all the way back to King Arthur days in fantasy. You've already got that in Star Wars with the lightsaber or Luke Skywalker. So no underrepresented tropes come to mind.
The next question is from Melody Guzman. Could we use dense materials found in asteroid 33 Polyhymnia for grav plating? Did I get that mouthful out
probably,
for you?
I'm not sure what it quite was, the word there.
Asteroid 33 Polyhymnia for grav plating. Can you use dense materials?
Okay, well, I don't recall hearing anything specific about that asteroid that would have any like massive stockpiles of osmium in it, for instance. That's the densest material I can think of off the top of my head. There probably are some transuranics that are even denser. I'm not a chemist, so they might know to tell you better. But even then, even if you're making a planet completely out of osmium, I think it still has to be several hundred kilometers across at least to actually present Earth-like gravity. And Earth is the densest planet. Actually, it's the densest object in the solar system that we know of. Other than some steel ball we might have hung in space. That was a solid steel ball. And that actually might be. It's one of my list of lesser filters that Earth's density might be putting into its hospitality to us. But habitability. Sorry, that was what I was looking for. Hospitality too, though. The only way you're going to get good gravity on an asteroid under known science is with artificial black holes. And I think it would be really cool to find out that we could generate it elsewise. Like, unlike FTL, I don't rule artificial gravity out as one of those things is impossible. If you can take a photon and use it to create any of the other transfer bosons, you should be able to do a graviton too. So you might have some kind of weird system. I think what I played around with one time just for sci-fi amusement was a neutrino gravitic system, something that could absorb neutrinos coming off a star and generate gravity in the opposite direction. It was just a hand wave to allow space habitats that were Dyson swarmy looking. But you might have things like that. You should be able to generate gravitons somehow without actually using mass. But it doesn't violate any known principles that I'm aware of. But other than that, mass and black holes or spin and spin gravity.
Feel flying. Isaac, I'm sure you've read Dune.
Oh, yes.
Do you think you'll cover their technology and culture in an episode sometime in the future?
It's because I did all the ones on 40K. No, it is actually kind of tempting. I thought about doing a couple quick specials when the next Dune movie came out. To just kind of put something out quickly on it. But it would be tempting. I'd say that... was it Dune, Ender's Game, and Foundation by Isaac Asimov usually win most of the polls, at least they did in the early noughts and 90s, for best sci-fi series ever. It was always those three at the top. And I always give them great examples of really good sci-fi that was very good hard science fiction that was based on some really bad science in some places. And I'd say for Ender's Game was the idea that you really could coordinate battles with kids over many light years, but for Foundation, it was always the idea that psychohistory could work, which you can't. And for Dune, it was the idea that a high-tech civilization with anti-gravity and cheap FTL would ever have a desert planet as a problem, since ice is the most common substance after like hydrogen and helium. So you just go to the outer solar, any place outer solar system probably have tons of water, and if not, truck it in. You see the size of those highliners in there. But it's a fantastic book series. I liked all of the original books by Frank Herbert, though they can get a little bit weird in like book 5 or book 6 in some places, or even book 3. But some of the ones by his son and Kevin J. Anderson are good too, but it kind of varies. They don't feel quite the same feel to them. They're not the same authors. But I would definitely recommend it to people. I think if I did cover it, though, I would probably stick just the original 6 books.
So, Ten Rays Tube. Hey, Isaac, what is the state of art of nuclear fuel recycling, and what are the hurdles right now in slowing that development here in the United States? Maybe address the first.
So I would say the first place is, to the best of my knowledge, the people doing the best recycling usually was France. They were the ones doing the best with their actual spent stuff, and there was laser separation, a few other methods going on. I usually am more interested in producing additional nuclear fuel with breeder reactors than I am about recycling old fuel. In terms of that being a hindrance, it really isn't. You could take all those spent fuel rods and throw them into one single small building. That's not the issue there. It's the lighter waste. Like right down from me, Perry Nuclear Power Plant. It's been in the sky my whole life. They call it the Cloud Factory locally. They start storing their stuff in one of they had a second reactor they ever turned on. They put all of it down there, but it's all those spent suits and things like that. All that lightly irradiated material that needs like a century to reach appropriate levels that takes up all the space. And I don't know that that's ever going to be an easy thing to replace. For fuel recycling, it's just about trying to get the most money out of it you can, and uranium is actually really cheap. So I'm not sure that's the thing holding back the industry. There'll probably be people who will very loudly disagree with that. You can check the comments. I'm sure they'll pop up shortly. But I would say that for fuel recycling, it's better than it's been, but it's not, to me, the main thing holding back the industry, except maybe from a perception standpoint of long-term storage.
I just realized that there was a third question.
Oh, was there? Okay.
How might nuclear rockets work now with current technology?
See your episode, the nuclear option, for full discussion, but you've got clean nuclear reactors where you're just taking the nuclear fuel and running it as a normal reactor to power something like an ion drive or a nuclear flash bulb or technically even a photon rocket, though that'd be really inefficient. You would heat up your ionized fuel or just thermally heat up hydrogen and spit out the back very quickly. And that would be your nuclear thermal rockets. You have options for like open cycle ones where you could actually produce enough thrust to get yourself off a planet, but I think that actually turning that one on, since that would be spitting radioactive waste out the back as opposed to a closed loop one, would probably not make you ever welcome on that planet again. But they're really quite safe in that regard. It's just I tend to think that you can never get around that you have a lot of uranium sitting on board a spaceship as it's going through the atmosphere if it's being launched. And that because of the nature of those rods, they're very dense. They go right through almost anything. They're not going to fall apart if the thing blows up. They're going to go land in big chunks. which makes them easy to recover mostly, but also very radioactive. And I don't think people would really be comfortable with a nuclear rocket in the atmosphere. So I always think of nuclear-powered spaceships as something where we take the fuel up carefully in large chunks, and then the ships actually running it are doing it for runs between orbital space, like geostationary orbit up to Mars or the Moon, not back and forth to Earth.
So the next question makes me laugh, because do you remember when you first asked me to look at maybe editing some of your scripts? Mm-hmm. And I was listening to the audio clip, and I presented you with a list of like 5 different things that you said repeatedly. The first rule of warfare, the first rule of warfare, the first rule of warfare. And I said, primordial numbers should have, or ordinal numbers should have first, second, third. And
it's so a long-running gag.
The question from Per Fernquist is, what is the best first rule of warfare in all of your first rules, and what would be the second?
Well,
now, I can answer the second.
Go ahead.
The second is, always have a dry pair of socks.
This is true. After years of trying to figure out what if I'd ever heard of a second rule from people asking me, I did actually remember one time a sergeant told me the second thing, the second most important thing is to always have a dry pair of socks. And that was actually a dry pair of socks and underwear in a little Ziploc bag. I highly recommend keeping one in your backpack or your trunk of your car. In terms of the first rules of warfare, there's only the one, and it's always the best one. I don't think I have a particular favorite of the larger category of them, though. I'd say maybe the let's say. Don't pick on don't pick on anyone your own size or smaller. Always pick on someone smaller than you. That's probably my favorite one. So only fight you can win.
Zerp Twerp, thank you for your super chat. Are you going to be attending a public event for the 2024 total solar eclipse, and will there be an opportunity for all of us fans to meet up?
Possibly. I know my alma mater down south of me, which is also in the zone, was doing an event for that and asked me to come or speak, but that's very tentative. They're talking to a lot of other folks from the area too. We do have NASA Glenn right up the road for them too, so there's probably someone in heliophysics who would do a better job talking about the event than me. But if I go to that one, that would be where it would be at. We Kent State, and you can look up that event as it goes. But barring that, otherwise I'll be sitting here on my patio out back and enjoying it that way. One of the two.
Should be an exciting day. All right. Do we fit in one more here before the break?
So, yeah.
Abjit. Hey, Isaac, how likely do you think that something like hold on, I think I may be misreading this one. We'll come back to that. Gerten Isk, thank you for your super chat. From the Netherlands here. Hi, Arthur. I'm a primary school teacher. Do you have any good sci-fi series I could recommend to my 10-year-old kids? I'm looking for something where the science is actually realistic.
I'm kind of mentally going through right now with the disclaimers of what might not be acceptable for a 10-year-old. I was entranced with Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy when I was 10. It was the big one for me. I don't know that that's the other material there was optimal for a 10-year-old, though. And that's the same thing I'd say you could probably get away with, like 2001 by Arthur C. Clarke, or the Foundation novels. Those are pretty solid for a 10-year-old, though. I'm trying to think of something that's like actual young adult one. A lot of the ones that come to mind, like Brandon Sanderson, and those tend to be more aimed at a fantasy audience, though that he does have a lot of crossover. There's going to be a bunch of people I'm forgetting about that I would remember them 5 seconds after we come back from the break, so I'll see if I remember them during the break. Next question? What was that last one again? Okay, we'll see you guys in about 3 minutes. While we are on break, feel free to get some more questions to the moderators for part 2. But one common question that gets brought up in discussion of space settlement are where are the stars nearest us besides Alpha Centauri that we might find planets around that we could terraform. As channel regulars know, I'm not a big on the idea that we need to limit ourselves to yellow suns like our own, or even just the neighboring ranges of cooler K-type orange dwarfs or the brighter F-types. But to discuss them briefly, there's only one F-type star within 20 light-years of us, Procyon. Altair and Sirius, which are A-type stars, brighter even than F, would not be considered good candidates normally. Nothing bigger than them is inside 20 light-years. In our upcoming Fermi Paradox Compendium episode, we'll be discussing both percolation and aurora theories, which generally focus on the idea that we colonize only fairly hospitable planets around yellow suns, and that these in turn grow up and colonize their own neighbors further from Earth.
And I thought I'd take a moment to explain why this traditional, somewhat space opera approach presents a slightly bleaker scenario for the Fermi paradox than it should. And again, I'm obviously pretty vocal that I think colonization won't hinge much on stellar types or planets available, but if we're assuming it did, then within 20 light years the pickings are scarce. And this represents a century of travel for even the most optimistic speed an Orion drive would achieve. Those G-type stars are highest KR incidentally by name and distance in light years: Alpha Centauri A, 4.37 light years, Tau Ceti, 11.9 light years, Sigma Draconis, 18.8 light years, Eta Cassiope, 19.4 light years, Epsilon Eridani, 19.8 light years, and Delta Pavonis, 19.9 light years. Except for Alpha Centauri A, which roughly matches our Sun, those are all cooler and dimmer, and indeed Alpha Centauri B, which is on the brighter side of the K-type, is closer to them than our Sun is, as would be Sigma Draconis. So, two big quick notes. You probably noticed most of those are about 19 light years away. That's semi-coincidental, but space is 3D, so the population of a given star is going to sharply rise with distance. But we often use parsecs in astronomy, and for instance, 5 parsecs is 16.3 light years. And if you asked how many plausible stars for colonization within 5 parsecs, you just get Alpha Centauri, Procyon, and Tau Ceti. And those first two are binaries, which is not favorable for finding habitable zone planets, particularly Procyon, which is an older star 7 times brighter than our Sun, orbited very essentially by its white dwarf companion out about where Neptune or Pluto would be, so not a good candidate for life. Numbers can be a bit misleading in astronomy for this purpose, as for instance, if you have a spaceship that can go twice as far as Earth than a previous model, on average that upgraded ship with double that range has 2 cubed or 8 times as many stars to choose from. Triple that range and has 3 cubed or 27 times the stars, quadruple, and 4 cubed or 64 times the stars. And if you can go 10 times as far, 1,000 times the stars. It is also important to remember that our Sun is not particularly representative of how stars are spread out. Even discarding dense star formations full of giants, finding a yellow sun with another yellow sun within a light year is not terribly rare. Why this matters is because it is common in Fermi paradox discussions to point to only a few stars nearby, acknowledge that a century of travel is a real effort to set up a colony, especially given that they have to settle a barren rock at the end of that marathon, not a paradise planet waiting for them to land, and just reason that if you only got a few candidates and some might not be viable, and each of those candidates would only have a couple more further from them that they could reach once they grew up and in turn colonized themselves, that efforts to colonize the galaxy might peter out very quickly. And again, that is entirely possible, but I feel this one is a lot like Drake's equation. We don't have a very good idea what numbers need to be pumped into it to match reality, and here, if we assume you can only go 5 parsecs and only colonize G-type stars, you've got 2 candidates, one binary, each with just 1 or 2 near them besides us too. Alternatively, I will usually include all the stars, regardless of classification, even brown dwarfs, and assume colonization is almost always a success if a ship arrives, and assume a wider range, so I don't get 2, I get several thousand, each within colonization range of several thousand themselves with wide overlap, and I only assume about double the distance of colony ship range. Needless to say, this provides a very different view of colonizing space, and one which I personally think is better supported, but time will tell. And speaking of time to get back to the live stream for more of your questions.
We finally figured out what was making the blinky on the screen, and unfortunately it's the computer right behind me. Not that about that.
It's the whole entire computer.
Yeah.
It's like the
There's like 3 of them over
liquid-cooled
there,
one.
so if you go and see them,
It's
those are
just
the
like-
ones for the show. There's 3 of them next to each other. They're all liquid cooled, but they're all blinky. Anyway, so coming back on that one, the now that we know more about the Pancosmorio theory, that's only very briefly touching on kind of some of the concepts of it. We did end up, as you noticed, that was kind of a longer break for an intermission. We did end up expanding that into an entire episode for January. Young adult science fiction, and I feel guilty for not even thinking to mention this before, Robert Heinlein's young adult series, the Scribner series, the last book of which is either Have Spacesuit Will Travel from last month,
Oh, yeah, that's fun.
or Starship Troopers. The book he wrote right after that, Starship Troopers, which is his biggest classic, is kind of seen as either the first book after that series, kind of the graduating book of it, or the last book of the series, with How Spacesuit Will Travel being the one right before that in the ending. There was like 12 or 13 of them. They're great. And so, yes, I'd recommend Robert Heinlein's young adult series of Scribner.
Well, the nice thing about longer breaks, more candy corn. And Isaac doesn't like it, so I can eat it all.
No, I'm not a candy corn fan. I don't.
I'm breaking my general rules about corn syrup just for candy corn in fall season. All right, the question that we have is Abhijit. Hey, Isaac, how likely do you think that something like the Butlerian the Dunes Luterian Jihad is likely in real life, considering people are getting wearier of AI by the day? Love the channel and everything you do.
So I think the Balerian Jihad from Dune doesn't show up in the movies. It's kind of a leftover event. That actually is the fourth series that Kevin J. Anderson and Brian Hobart wrote after Frank Hobart's death. I think it was the second one. They did 3 books, the House Atreides, Harkonnen, and Carino books, and then they did the Balerian Jihad ones. And I actually kind of like those, but the thing is, we get a description of them in the books, then we get a description of them in the Dune Encyclopedia that would have been put together while Frank Hobart was still alive, and then you get the one from those series. And it's set about 10,000 years before the Dune novels happened, and it's where they smash up all the robots and free humanity from those enslaving them. And it was either humans who controlled the robots who enslaved the rest of humanity, kind of that like, well, the people who owned all the robots used them to enslave everybody else scenario. And others, the robots are actually the ones running the show, and that's the version that was done by his son and Kevin J. Anderson. And it kind of depends on which one of those we're talking about, how you would handle that, and how likely I think it is. I can definitely see scenarios where you would have the people who control the robots using those to oppress other people in the Frank Hobart original version. I have a little bit more difficulty imagining the scenario that's in the other book series where you basically have a bunch of cyborgs hijack the AI that is peacefully running the system, and it turns sentient and enslaves. They use it to enslave humanity, and then it enslaves them. But that's kind of the you let Pandora's box open, and now the dragons come and bitch you. Either one of them you could happen, but I think that I would not expect that to be something that happened to all of humanity in the same spot for either case scenario, because I don't see there ever being a kind of a unified humanity to have just one AI that somebody could hack or take over. So you might have that in one country where that happened, or on one planet, but probably not the entirety of humanity at once. That's kind of the problem with the technological singularities. It's really only a danger while you only have one planet, and while you might have it pop out very quickly, is otherwise you always have places that didn't have it but had the same technology that could reciprocate if something got out of control. So I would say I think both scenarios are very plausible, but probably not in a totality of humanity kind of way unless they happen in the next 50 years.
So we have a super chat.
Don't worry about it. It won't happen until your lifetime.
We have a super chat. The gentleman says, I have autism and I often like to retreat to the woods to read. I'm currently reading The Moat in God's Eye.
Great
Thanks
book.
for suggesting that book.
Yeah. No, I would say Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle are both fantastic authors. Jerry Pournelle passed away, though. But just fantastic. And that book, A Moat in God's Eye, is, or was it The Moat in God's Eye? Either way, The Moat in God's Eye is a great book. Read that book. It's great. It's a sequel written many years later. The Gripping Hand is also very good. And then it's set in Jerry Pournelle's Codinium series one, which is kind of a classic military sci-fi setting. So if you do like those, it's definitely got a theme very similar to like David Webb was Honorverse or the Battletech Mech Warrior setting. So a good one for reading if you like that type of sci-fi, which I do.
Owen Shaw says, if you are alive 10,000 years from now, where do you think you might be living?
Ideally, I'd still be here on my phone. I kind of like the idea of still being here.
You like the new office?
I do. I really do. Well, it's the same office. We just rearranged it. We painted the walls, by the way. So for those of you who've seen the live stream before, this is normally the area that Sarah's sitting at, and it's been redone as my office. And I'm not going to show you on the camera the other one, because one, I might knock the camera over, and two, it's still in movement. So there's like a vacuum cleaner or a step ladder off that way. So,
Hammer and a few other minor details. But, yes. Nolan Kennedy, thank you for your super chat. If timelines could converge or branch moving forward, And if we traveled time through backwards, couldn't we end up in different timelines? Could that be a way for explaining why reversed entropy doesn't make sense?
Could you give that to me one more time?
If timelines can converge or branch moving forward,
Yeah.
if we traveled time through backwards, couldn't we end up in different timelines?
Yeah.
Could that be a way for explaining why reversed entropy doesn't make sense?
So there's a number of, well, on that last one, that's a lot more of a theoretical question that's going to be a little harder to answer because it depends on which cosmology you're working with. And that's my coffee cup that's on the screen. I was trying to figure out what the white thing was. So you have the scenarios where the universe just keeps branching like a tree. And that is one possibility, but you'll hear people say, oh, no, that's not what we mean. That is one of the options, is everything just keeps branching off. But people say, well, what about energy conservation? Where are those universes getting all the extra energy from? And the answer that some would say is, well, they already exist. It's just that you have every possible state of matter that the universe could have is already out there, including the one where every last atom is in some way making up a cheeseburger. Because that is a possibility. However, with finitely tiny that is, it's still possible. And what you're doing is kind of working your way through the various states the universe can be in, and your personal timeline goes that way. And so you're not really moving forward or backward in time, except in the sense that the universe has a certain size, and that be your arrow of time in that kind of context is how old the universe was. You always have to take a step forward in time to get to it. Now, if you can run backward in time through that, potentially too, but the thing is, for any one of those given states, you would have multiple different timelines backwards too, not just forward. So you have the branching timelines forward, you also have them going backward too. There's so many of these theories, and I know I tend to beat up on multiverse theory and many worlds. It's not because I think they're bad theories per se, it's just that there's this much evidence, that they actually are true. And there's this much evidence they're false too. But it's just, you can really get in the weeds on which one of them says what and what the implications are philosophically, metaphysically, and in terms of what the actual function of time or entropy are on those. And so, yes, Michael Crichton's Time Machine book, I'm trying to remember what it's called, Time something, but I think they actually did a movie on it. Was completely different, though. As is often the case with Michael Crichton books, they very rarely have anything to do with the movie they made for them. But the one they have there, they actually are doing that. They hop to an alternate universe where basically that's how they did their time travel, is they're going to a universe where it's the same one, basically the same as ours, but a little bit younger. So they're just moving sideways. So imagine that Earth formed 500 years later, but everything else would be completely the same. And you step into that universe, and you're basically in whatever that would be, 1523 AD, which would be had to be the 8th, so that if memory source. And that would be the way you do that time travel there, for instance. There's different theories for each different cosmology, though.
Christian Corello has a super chat. I was told that an Orion drive would tear a solar sail apart, and a way to decelerate it is by turning it around using RCS thrusters and or reactor wheels. Okay. What do you think? And doing a deceleration burn. So, do you agree?
It would work. Okay, so the Orion drive is usually assumed to be blowing. Like usually, the pusher plate on the back of one of those is thought to be made of uranium, right? So those are very dense little particles, and if you're blowing off a hydrogen bomb behind you to push on a big sail, which you can do too, that sail needs to be fairly sturdy because it is trying to absorb a nuclear bomb in as small a blast as possible, and there's going to be a lot of radiation in there, but it's also going to be a lot of fragments of uranium or plutonium, which is about as almost penetrating as you can get. They're very dense. They're perfect for making bullets or to rip things apart. So they tend to be rough on sails, which is why you tend to think about making the pusher plate out of it. But you can still do it that way. The idea would usually be not that you're using the sail for that, but you're retracting it afterwards behind that. So imagine I have my big uranium plate right here, and then the bombs go off over here. But then over here, we have the packaging place where I'm going to put the sail afterwards. So before I turn my Orion drive on, I'm expanding a big graphene or aluminum foil sail out. I'm going to hit that with a laser. And then when we're up to the best speed that laser can give us, we're going to suck that sail in, wind it up, recycle bits of it if needed or whatever, and store it behind that pusher plate so that it's still helping us get some radiation shielding. Or we could put it in the front of the ship too, for that matter, for radiation shielding. But it's not actually being hit by the fragments. Then you turn the Orion drive on and start blowing things up behind it. and that just gives you a little extra radiation shielding or redundancy with your sail. No matter what you do, if you're doing a 40-year voyage with a thin sail like that, you're probably going to bring that in, melt it down, and recycle it and put it back out again. Maybe not, but that seems like the best option. It doesn't matter if it's all pucked like cheesecloth, though, because it's in space. It's a vacuum of space. So it can have lots of holes. That's fine. But it's still easier to deploy than imagine if it's not in a horrible shape.
Christoph Ziska, I'm sorry if that's mangling your name. If you had excess energy, can you get rid of spent radioactive fuel by splitting it until it's just protons and neutrons that will decay into protons anyway?
No, because once you're down the area about nickel and iron, the 56 to 60 nucleons area, you're not getting any profitable fission at that point in time. You can still cut something in half, right? Same as you can also fuse things that are bigger than iron. Say, well, you can't fuse above iron. So, well, you can fuse things above iron. You just have to put more energy in than it takes. That's why you want to get them out of very energetic events that are sucking up a lot of energy to make it. There's no energy released by the fusion of things heavier than that. They are net subtractor. Same for fission below that stage, as you're usually going to lose energy in the process. You can still have decays beneath that, like potassium decay. That's a beta decay. That can still give off net energy, but that's not changing that nucleus. Sorry, that's not splitting that nucleus. So it's not fission. You could break things down to the proton level, but it's going to cost you energy, not give you energy. And that's one of those things where if you could change the laws of physics or change a physical constant, you might be able to change things like that around, but then you probably have much better ways to generate power at that point than by fission or fusion.
Maybe. El Augusta says, Isaac, what do you think the upper limit is on super strength enhancements on a human without making them look inhuman or conspicuous?
Well, it kind of depends on what you're using as the actual fake muscle. I could mention Battletech earlier. There they had Myanmar muscle or something. I can't remember what it's called, but it was kind of an early idea of using something other than a piston, something more like a muscle-based fiber. There, you should be able to pull off anything you could do with like a piston, though. Inside, like if your arm was just one gigantic piston, you should be able to match that with something a little bit more elaborate, like a muscle fiber. But you should be able to set somebody up so they would be able to lift a car over their head. I don't think you get them up to like the battle tank level, but yes. So Captain America strength, yes. While still looking human. Spider-Man strength or Thor strength, maybe not so much, but that would be one of those things I'd have to refer that to an engineer who actually works with the hydraulics, because that would be my default for like the baseline of where you're hitting. That would be the kind of standard candle. You might be able to do things that were better than that. You might not be able to get to that level, but that would give you the number. And I honestly do not know what that is, but it should at least be in the low tons. So now, mind you need to have that in your spine too. So can I do the whole reconfiguration at that point?
Floor Horbeck says, could gravity have emerged one dimension at a time, and then the third dimension is inflation, from a zero dimension that started without levels of degrees of freedom at 0 degrees Kelvin?
Give you that one again.
Could gravity have emerged one dimension at a time, then the third dimension, inflation, from a zero dimension that started without levels of degrees of freedom at 0 degrees Kelvin?
And then stopped before it did. Because remember, when we talk about string theory, the idea is there are still more physical dimensions past those three plus time, and that they just didn't expand, they didn't inflate. That inflationary epoch, and again, that's not proven either. I kind of always emphasize that. I land on the yes, that probably did happen thing, because it almost has to make sense, but there's not like exactly experimental evidence of that either. We could just have really bad models. So we really can't see anything before 400,000 years after the Big Bang, because everything was just blanketed in that surface of last scattering you talk about on the show, and that was basically the surface of the sun. Almost all of your helium dates to that first couple of minutes too, where it was denser than your typical supernova blast. Let's see. Being as dense as sun's core doesn't really matter for something like that, because sun's cores, they fuse hydrogen over like billions of years, so you gotta be really ultra dense to try to put hydrogen and helium together. And I'm trying to think how to answer that question, because I don't. You're going to have to ask. That'd be like a Sean Carroll question. I'm not going to be able to answer that one for you. maybe Paul Sutter. For that, yeah, no, I don't see how I could have done it one at a time like that, but it is possible that yeah, it's an interesting idea. I'll leave it at that. I can't usefully opine on it. My wife is coughing at the moment, so I'll ask the next question. That's it. Rob Hawk asks, what is the best sci-fi novel where Earth is invaded by competing alien ecology? There was one, I don't think it was a novel, but it was Invasion something or other. It's a BBC production. Same for Threshold, which I'll go to too. I'm trying to remember what it was called, maybe Invasion Earth, but there we do actually have alien life forms popping up on the Earth. That was a interesting little miniseries. Then there's Threshold, that would be another one. Brief TV show that only lasted one season and had Brent Spiner in it, Commander Data from Star Trek, and Peter Dinklage from Game of Thrones, but they were the two of the scientists on there, and they were a great combination. Ironically, they didn't have top billing because they weren't as well known at that time. So they were part of the main team. It was a great series, but there they have an alien tesseract that shows up and hybrids people. So, and it's a very interesting one because you get some ecologies that pop up associated to that from that alien planet or these hybrid versions. Earth Final Conflict, Gene Roddenberry's Earth Final Conflict from the late 90s expands a bit of that too. But in terms of alien ecologies, that would be the major ones I would think of for that one. Probably is the good ones for that.
So, what are the ramifications of infinity not being real and everything being finite?
Well, we don't know that everything is finite. We know everything we can actually detect is finite. I should point out you can never actually prove anything as infinite, either maybe mathematically, but you can't practically produce anything that's infinite. I'll give you an example. You've got a little chord, and we say this line runs from here to infinity, and so well, in order to actually count or verify that, I would have to take an infinite period of time to do it. So you can never actually verify that. Plus, if you're going through space in a straight line long enough, or any trajectory felt like, you would eventually reach a place where it was so identical by random luck to the universe that you left, which would have presumably changed in the meantime anyway, that you would not know if you were repeating or not. And you had a pretty good case that it wouldn't matter. So you really can never prove something is infinite. You can prove it's finite, though. But you cannot prove something is infinite that way, not in a practical sense. So, I mean, to be honest, I don't know that we can really answer that question properly. That's like 2 in a row.
It looks like we have about 10 or 15 questions left if we go a few minutes long. Yeah. I know you wanted to make sure we cleared them today. So Primaris says, Isaac, do you think femtotech like AB matter or Planck technology is possible?
Realistically, probably not, just because it's such a small scale. If you get something like magnetic monopoles working, though, or if we really master quarks better, then maybe, and if that's so, that would be an amazing thing in terms of the kind of mechanical properties those could have. You have materials that might let you, hold a star up or suspended by a string that thick. So.
Lucky Hero 7 says, how soon can you see humanity harvesting our star?
Not for several hundred years, the very earliest, probably more like thousands, just because there's so many other low-hanging fruit and asteroids. And unless we really grow really fast, which we don't seem to be inclined to do, you should have several hundred years where we just don't need that much resources or even power collection. But anytime after that, because exponential growth is exponential, at that point you might start saying, yes, let's tap this. But you might do it on other stars instead, where you tap neighboring stars and use that same process to send them back as high-speed matter beams back here to mine them instead of our own sun.
All right, we have a username that I don't think I can even pronounce. Hi Isaac, metal-rich asteroids are always emphasized as the prime target for mining, but I'm curious how loose rubble piles might be valuable too. Aggregates as ablative plating, or just as mock soil?
Mock soil. The regolith is always very useful, and again, there's metals in all of these. It's the level of density of them and what types of metals. And again, there's the astronomical definition of metals versus the chemical one. But the carbon ones are probably going to be your most useful in a lot of contexts. Now, mind you, diamond and graphene, which would be both wonderful things to build out of, are 100% carbon. That's what they're made out of. So the metal ones are most valuable for immediate usage, but the others will probably be more valuable in the long term.
Flor Horbeck says, hypothetically speaking, you have invented a generator that doesn't have an exhaust and is a solution for global warming. How would you go ahead? I'm assuming that means and build it, because I'm freaking out, to be honest.
Would I build one that had an exhaust?
That does not have an exhaust as a solution for global warming.
I mean, if I had a generator that didn't have exhaust, I would love to be a trillionaire. I would love to be able to patent that and just have my name as the author generator. If you got something that is basically a perpetual motion machine, or which doesn't have to follow the normal rules of thermodynamics, then you absolutely should build that. Though you should always pause for a moment and ask, could this have some really horrifying side effect? To which the answer is probably yes. But
just a random example.
Yeah. I mean, solar power is an example of something that we kind of similar to that, if I'm reading what you mean by that. And yes, do more of that if you can. It's which ones catch up economically, because a lot of times you'll spend more energy just trying to make certain things that are more energy efficient. So it's a complicated process trying to weigh what the best steps on that are, but always aim for your most efficient devices.
It's lesser known. Thank you for your super chat. Hi, Isaac. My birthday is coming up, and I'm excited to be celebrating it early with y'all. Thanks for celebrating with us, too.
Happy birthday.
What are some environmental considerations of orbital rings, such as invasive species or changes in the weather?
There was a YouTube video out that was like a pilot preview for a movie on orbital ring, and it showed this thing that had like a base that looked like it was bigger than a state, like holding the ring up in space around some plate that looked like it was thousands of miles wide. And we do contemplate that as an option for building like artificial planets, but an orbital ring around Earth would be, meters wide, maybe 1 meter wide, maybe smaller than that to begin with, maybe tens of meters wide when it got bigger, maybe even 1 kilometer wide. And you would certainly see that at nighttime at that point in time. But for the most part, they're not that big. They're not going to change the weather that much. If you keep building bigger, then it's like a billion. It's like saying, if I build a skyscraper, what effect would it have on the weather? And the answer is pretty much none. What if I build 10,000 of them? That does change the system a little bit, right? Heat islands and cities are a noticeable effect. But for the most part, an orbital ring in itself is not all that big of an impact compared to a building of similar mass that's on this planet and is pretty much more direct shadows or wind blocks on the way.
Question from Void. If a Brownian ratchet could actually work, what would be the societal and technological consequences?
But going back to the invasive species one before I get real quick, I think that's just a matter of quarantine. If you've got things coming in from other planets, you want to quarantine them as best as you can. But in of itself, the orbital ring shouldn't generate any major invasive species issues unless you did like the big spiraling up cases we talked about sometimes that you walk from one place to another, in which case you might have things migrate along the orbital ring across continents, but they couldn't swim or fly. So the Brownian ratchet, if I remember right, is off the top of the head because it really doesn't cover that much, is another one of those examples of a device that's designed to use quantum or just Brownian motion in general, which is the tiny little ricochets of particles, to in some way power an engine. And it's kind of the same problem with like vacuum energy is there's energy there, right? But how do you actually make it work? So Brownian motion, one of the things Einstein actually studies, just the different sized particles, right? You got a little object that's in water, it gets hit by a bunch of particles on this side, a bunch of particles on this side, it bobs a little bit back and forth. If you could set it up so that you absorbed all the energy that one side was grabbing you and use that for some kind of mechanical motion, that would obviously be a good way to tap energy, because it's basically got something that's lukewarm. Unfortunately, there's no real thermodynamic way to make that work. If you could make it work, then you would have effectively a way to make energy out of lukewarm bath water, which is going to violate the laws of thermodynamics, or at least, if not violate them, heavily impinge on them and probably violate probation. So, like anything else that does that, if you've got it and you can make it work, congratulations, you're a trillionaire. Remember me fondly. So
I gotta jump to the question on the finances here. Kent Lavis, thank you for your super chat. Hello, Isaac. In a civilization with cheap energy and smart automations, would it be easy to just get rich by controlling one aspect of the energy, such as contractors or mercantile?
If you control any large group of economic activity, you're going to be in a good position to get something, power, influence. It depends on what the person would be aiming for and what it produces. So I would say probably yes in that context, yes.
Milano says, how quickly could smart matter realistically reshape itself? Could we get Terminator-style shapeshifting? Or nanoscale legs mean more speed, or more like slime molds?
So, slime mold for some things would probably be the most useful. You could do the Terminator level thing, but that's not like liquid atoms bending together. That'd be more like a bunch of cell-sized machines that could rapidly kind of flow around. So under a microscope, it would look like a whole bunch of building blocks moving around on legs, or flagella, whatever it would happen to be. So that one might be viable. You do have one big issue, though, is you produce heat whenever you move stuff around. And so when we think about, oh, we're going to take this nanotech and it's going to go rebuild this rock. Say, well, you're busy reforging this piece of rock into a big carbon diamond, which sounds great. You would have released a ton of heat. Enough that if you're doing that in mere seconds, you set that area on fire and destroy your nanobots, which are never going to be temperature resistant. You're not going to make nanobots that are like, able to survive super, super insanely hot temperatures. They are always going to be more delicate than something bigger or made of the same kind of materials would be.
Question from Nathaniel. What do you believe is the most viable solution for long-term moon colonization and living in 1/6 of Earth's gravity?
Dropping a black hole into it so you can live in no more gravity. We talked about that in Moonmaker City, and I actually do like that option the best, is the idea of hollowing the moon out and putting a black hole in there. But I've also always liked the idea of terraforming it, but it would be para-terraforming, where you just kind of glass it over and fill it with green and water inside. And that wouldn't super leak if you got a crack, because the moon does have enough gravity to hold on to air. It just doesn't have enough gravity to hold on to air that's been excited in any way, so it will not gush up out of thing per se, other than just the pressure issue. Let's see. I think that really is the long-term fate of those. We turned into a gigantic megastructure of some kind. So, as much as I didn't like that film where they had the hollow moon recently, I would say that actually is a fairly probable scenario in terms of the net effect that we hollow the moon out and use to build stuff.
Zachary Bush. Hi, Isaac. If you could create matter and energy from nothing, could you create literal magic? And if you could create a universe from scratch, what would your universe look like?
Literal magic's kind of a hard one to put to, because if you go back, you go back to a few hundred years ago, they stopped believing in magic because they thought it was impossible. Before that, they just thought of it as another process you could do. And so to the literal magic sense, that was really more of a, with knowledge we can do things. And then we started finding other things we do with knowledge, like science, that basically kind of fill that gap. So I don't know that you could ever make a literal magic, since the modern context, the implication is magic is false. But you could certainly make a lot of mind-bending rules on something like that. If I could make matter and energy freely, what would I do? Tons and tons and tons and tons of planets. I would mass churn them out. Big megastructures. Things like that. The biggest ones I could possibly make it as many of them I could. That would be what I would do. So,
Rob
that's probably not surprising, is it?
Rob Hawk, thank you for your super chat. What is the best sci-fi novel where Earth is invaded by a competing alien ecology?
We answered that one while you're up.
Oh, sorry. Feel flying. If you had a chance, would you try some melange spice from Dune?
Well, melange has known side effects. It can let you see the future. It lets you age slow and be in better health, and turns you into a gigantic mutant worm. So, yes, I would absolutely take the spice melange if I could. It extends life and lets you see the future. How could I say no to that one, personally? But I think that book does really handle the ramifications as them not necessarily being a good thing very well. So I'd recommend reading through it and seeing why foresight's not necessarily a good thing to have. But I think I would definitely I would definitely grab that if I could. So, yes.
And the last one I have at the moment is from The Cause. Thank you for your super chat. Do you think that AI will be able to predict the future in coming years, maybe even as well as you do?
I could hope it does. I don't really think of myself as predicting the future. I think of myself kind of like following logical trends down. So you cannot predict the future no matter how good your AI is. You cannot predict the future with any machine built inside the universe. That's just how that works. For one thing, you're going to seriously alter it just by thinking. The heat you give off from your computer engines was going to warm things up, for instance, and change the weather. But you cannot predict these things like people think. The complexity to back calculate trajectories of individual particles and things like that, even without factoring in quantum, starts rising really fast exponentially. So even a computer as big as the universe would not be able to exactly calculate what every molecule is going to be. So that perfect prediction of the future, not going to happen. Flip side of that, though, can you predict trends? Yes, I can predict the weather decently, right? Not very well personally, but meteorologists can do that. We can predict where Earth or Mars are going to be in the future, and we can predict how someone's going to react if you put their hand towards their face, they might flinch, or any number of other things. That should be possible to do, and I think a computer probably could do that very well, but not better than a human could do. And so, in that regard, yes, I think we could predict the future pretty well, and so it'll be time for another question. My phone is going out, so I think that was probably our last question. So, with that very good music going off in the background of whatever that is, new phone, new craziness, new studio. As a reminder, we are not having a live stream next month, and then we will be having one for December 31st, and that will be our last one for at least a few months after that, if not longer. We'll be on hiatus for the spring for the live streams, though we'll be replacing that with normal episodes for a while too. So anyway, thank you everyone for joining me for this is live stream number 59. Our next one will be live stream 60 for December 31st, 2023, and we will see you all then, and we'll also see you all back here on Thursday for our episode, which I believe is Rebel Space Colonies, followed by the Fermi Paradox Compendium Solutions, which is 3 hours and 10 minutes long. And we will see you all then for those.
Thank you for joining us for another monthly live stream. If we missed any of your questions, feel free to put them in the comments on the episode, and we'll see you on Thursday. But if you don't want to wait, you can check out any of this month's recent episodes, or see our bonus content over on Nebula at go.nebula.tv/Isaac Arthur. As always, thanks for watching, and have a great week.